now I would like to give the floor to our president, Tony Mahabir, chairman of CIfa. Thank you, Tony.
Wow, so many happy faces. Welcome to our historic event, our very first CIfa conference here at the United Nations. Excellencies, distinguished guests, fellow independent financial advisors like myself, ladies and gentlemen. Through the efforts of our Secretary General, Jean-Pierre, our Executive Committee, and our Advisory Board, CIfa continues to stay relentlessly focused on our mission and vision of the Foundation, to protect and defend the interest of independent financial advisors, to propose and present projects for harmonization of rules, regulations, to facilitate the implementation of the new rules and procedures, and to establish a code of conduct to deal with unethical practices and money laundering, beginning with our Charter of Investors' Right. To accomplish this, we bring together all relevant stakeholders to the table for in-depth dialogue and cooperation to deal with a world of increased volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity facing investors and the populace in general, whether they are suppliers or consumers, regulators or those being regulated, public enterprises or private finance. We are all on the same lifeboat, known as planet Earth, and doing nothing when we see huge holes on either side of the ship won't keep us floating for long. The UN Sustainable Development Goals and its 2030 agenda is a very ambitious goal. And while IFAs will have to do their fair part with those they serve, we must also cope with the burden of changing regulations, lack of harmonization, and inconsistent standards and certification nationally and internationally. Clearly, it does not make our jobs any easier, but win we must, and so must you. As triple Grand Slam tennis champion and humanitarian Arthur Ashe stated, start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. Success is a journey, not a destination. The doing is often more important than the outcome. Anglican Bishop Desmond Tutu said, "Do your little bit of good wherever you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelms the world." But why should we adopt this win-we-must mindset and commit wholeheartedly to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Simply put, there is no planet B for the backup plan. There are no alternatives. It is frequently estimated by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, that $5 to $7 trillion a year are needed to realize the 2030 agenda for sustainable development worldwide. That's a lot of money. As financial advisors and planners, we know how much money that is, and beyond the scope of simply relying on the governments alone worldwide. CIfa, being the only global investment organization granted general consultative status by ECOSOC, has a passion and deep interest in the successful outcomes of all 17 of the SDGs. Over the past year, as president of CIfa and in running my own firm, I run into organizations and they focus on one or two of the SDGs. But this is the organization, CIfa as a foundation. We try to ensure we raise awareness in all 17. Clearly, the private sector has a huge role to play and can play an even bigger role in the realization of the SDGs. But first, it requires a change of heart. Then everything else will fall in place. Therefore, I consider our overarching theme, how to mobilize private finance towards funding the UN SDGs, incredibly timely and relevant for this year's CIfa conference. So over the next 2 days, here at the United Nations, CIfa has a simple goal. Collectively, we will explore through civil discourse on how we can improve cooperation amongst nations and inspire financial and economic leaders and practitioners to search for innovation and innovative solutions, actually, to the current economic and financial challenges. To enable the private sector as also to do their fair share in the implementation of the SDGs on a regional, national, and global level. Today and tomorrow, you will hear from thought leaders from all walks of life, ambassadors, researchers, politicians, human rights advocates, UN directors, etc., who will offer insights, awareness, and tangible solutions on how to mobilize private finance towards the funding of the UN SDGs. Overall, we will explore 6 themes, starting with poverty. Is it a business? If so, who profits the most? And are so-called attempts to actually help those that need it, is it keeping them poor or liberating them? We then shift gears for financing for development, how to finance the 2030 agenda, including updates and trends on SDG implementation and monitoring. And we will conclude today with ECOSOC leading the theme One World for All by Hanifa. Tomorrow, we'll begin with the global financial system regulation, aligning the financial system interests with the common good for all goals, delve into taxation and SDGs. Are taxation and tax compliance going too far? Helping or hindering economic development? We often say we should look at taxation as plucking feather from a sleeping goose, right? I don't know if you ever pluck feather from a goose that's wide awake. It's a very dangerous job, okay? But the idea is, how do you pluck the feather from the sleeping goose? Enough feathers without waking it up. Private citizens all around the world can only tolerate so much taxation. Concluding our event, our last theme, quantum politics and SDGs, is the new geopolitical arena rewriting the rules towards achieving the SDGs. So we think we have a pretty fulsome agenda over the next 2 years. Over the next, 2 days. Thank you.
20 years.
But before launching into our first theme, let's refresh ourselves. It's very important to refresh and not make assumptions. Let's refresh ourselves by asking the provocative question, why? Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, stated, "We cannot change what we're not aware of, and once we are aware, we cannot help but change." According to the best-selling author Simon Sinek, it's probably worth asking why first before delving into the hows. So over the next 2 days, we're going to hear a lot of hows. But what is it that inspires you? What is that passion that brought you to New York? How are we going to engage private enterprises? To why should they pay attention? So while we're asking them for a lot of how they can contribute, we need to wake them up as to why. So over the past year, whether officially speaking for CIfa, Canada, or my firm, I try my very best to raise awareness of the UN SDGs to help people find their whys. For some, 1 or 2 of the SDGs resonated the most for them to take meaningful action within their means. For others, they see the importance, as I said earlier, of all 17 SDGs. The approach goes something like this. Imagine what the world would be like if we have no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality. Imagine if that was possible. Yet the sad and disturbing statistics show that around 830 million people worldwide live in extreme poverty. Let's eradicate poverty. That's why. Is that enough to get you moving? Around 750 million people are undernourished, and 45% of deaths of children of less than 5 years of age is a result of poor nutrition. Imagine zero hunger. That's why we should support the initiative. If we successfully address child health, maternal health, HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases like tuberculosis, we would have taken a major step towards good health and well-being. That's why. Does that resonate with you? By eliminating gender disparities in education and ensure equal access to all levels of educational and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities and indigenous peoples, it would lead to vocational skills for employment, decent job, and entrepreneurship, which is, by the way, the engine that drives every local economy in every nation. Quality education really is a right. That's why. If we end all forms of violence, exploitation, and discrimination against all women and girls everywhere, it would lead to the empowerment of all women and all girls everywhere. What's wrong with that? Let's promote gender equality. That's why. You'd be amazed how many people light up when you start with a purposeful question as opposed to a profit question. It isn't if you're a for-profit organization or non-profit. What is your purpose? And being purposeful, helping people find that why, it's amazing what would happen. Going on, imagine what the world would be like if we have clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, the promotion of sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work. Yet, the reality is, disturbingly, we hear that water scarcity affects 40% of global population and is expected to rise, while still 4 billion people lack access to basic sanitation, such as toilets and latrines. Is it any wonder that 80% of human activities are discharged into our rivers and seas? Let's ensure clean water and sanitation for all. That's why. 3 billion people still rely on wood, coal, charcoal, or animal waste for cooking and heating. Access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy for all. Imagine how that would impact life. That's why. I want to tell people, this is not statistics I have made up. The body of knowledge, the literature is there. You just got to have a reason to go look it up yourself and find what it is that will help you be purposeful. You know, every time you put your hand in your pocket to spend money, ask, what causes am I supporting? What am I contributing to? Nearly 2.2 billion people live on $2 below the poverty line, actually. And that poverty eradication is only possible through stable and well-paid jobs. What is wrong with the promotion of inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all? That's another why. Imagine what the world would be like if we have industry, innovation, infrastructure, reduce inequities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumptions and production with climate action. Because we all know that inadequate infrastructure leads to a lack of access to markets, jobs, information, and training, creating a major barrier to doing business. Striving to build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation means a brighter future for all. That's why. I read recently in an article, a footbridge, a bridge very narrow, not more than 3 feet wide, built between two rural communities. increase trade between that communities by over 15%. Isn't that awesome? Right? Something as simple as that. You don't need an engineering firm. You don't need millions of dollars to build a footbridge between two rural communities. And yet the impact have immediate action. I also want to say, in countries where significant inequalities exist, it creates major threat to long-term social and economic development. Let's adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage, and social protection policies, in order to progressively achieve greater quality. That's another why. 828 million people live in slums today, and that number keeps rising. Let's make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. That's why. That's not a problem only in poor countries. It's actually an ever bigger problem in countries that we consider the rich countries. When the global population reached $9.6 billion by 2050, the equivalent of almost 3 planet Earth, could be required to provide the natural resources such as water, energy, and food needed to sustain current lifestyle. Let's promote sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources. That's why IFAs have a rare opportunity. And that opportunity we have, CIfa, for example, represent over a million advisors worldwide. Imagine 1 million advisors encouraging investments into causes that answer these whys. By integrating climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning, we might be able to minimize the warming of oceans or increase the global temperature, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So let's take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. That's another why. Finally, imagine what the world would be like if we have profound respect for life below water, life on land, justice, and strong institutions versus the current reality. Over 3 billion people depend on marine and coastal biodiversity for their livelihood. Yet oceans are heavily affected by human activities, including pollution, depleted fisheries, and loss of coastal habitats. Let's conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources. That's why around 1.6 billion people depend on forests for their livelihood, 2.6 billion people depend directly on agriculture, and over 80% of human diet is provided by plants. We have to sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. That's why corruption, bribery, theft, tax evasion cost some US $1.26 trillion for developing countries per year. Imagine if we arrest that problem alone. There's 20% of our annual budget for the UN SDG, right? This amount of money could be used to lift those who are living on less than $1.25 a day for at least 6 years. We must not ignore just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. Imagine what the world would be like if we have partnerships and alignments and full participation of public and private finance for the goals. Trust me, CIfa will do its part to help private finance, to help individual investors, to help IFAs be, that instrument that raise awareness, because sustainable development should be complemented by a multi-stakeholder partnership that mobilize and share knowledge, expertise, technology, financial resources to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in all countries. It is an inescapable truth that we must revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. That's the big why. So I hope I've given enough why to inspire all of you. At least 17 whys were given. You don't have to fall in love with all 17. Just pick one that you can run with to help us engage private enterprise, to help the amazing work the UN is doing with the Sustainable Development Goal. Because in the end, We hope that enabling companies and investors to scale up investments that embrace sustainability can help in reallocating capital to achieve the SDGs. We must shift our mindset. As I said earlier, it is no longer NGOs or GOs. It is no longer private finance or public finance. It is no longer for-profit enterprise or non-for-profit. The unifying theme should rise above all to for-purpose, a purpose-based mission, as espoused by world leader Banu Pota of India. I end my welcome address with a simple, truthful, humble, but effective quote. You all in the room here can do what I cannot do. And we at CIfa cannot do what you can do. But together, we can do great things. I copied that quote from that heavenly angel, Mother Teresa. Thank you.